Good evening, I'm David Kramer with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska. You can get updates to the forecast or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we might have out for your area. Also call our weather info line, 1-800-472-0391. Get any updates to the forecast through that means, or you can email me at the address at the bottom of the screen, david.kramer@noaa.gov. Starting off, we'll take a look at the one warning that we do have out for the state. That is for St. Lawrence Island. That is a high wind warning that is going to start tonight at midnight, and that's going to go through 6 p.m. on Wednesday. Now that's going to have some winds out of a southeasterly direction, sustained around 30 to 45 miles per hour, but there will be gusts up to as high as 65 miles per hour during that time. Again, that is from midnight tonight until 6 p.m. on Wednesday, and that is a high wind warning for the St. Lawrence Island area. Taking a look now at some climate, this is focused in on the Panhandle area, and this is the climate for September. So we'll notice if we start off in the top right of our screen, we can see that the temperatures for this year and September are in the blue there, and they are all higher than the locations for the same temperatures for the normals for those areas. So Yakutat at 49.5 average temperature this year in September, whereas normally they see 48.4, so a degree higher. So not a lot higher in many locations, a little bit higher there at Ketchikan, up to about 4 degrees higher than their normals. And then as we look down into the bottom right panel, we can see our precipitation. The green, or the top value, is for this year in September, and then the more orange color just beneath the green color is for the normals for September. So Yakutat saw quite a bit less, almost half as much as normal, and all locations that we have are seeing less than normals. Petersburg saw less than half. Ketchikan saw just a little bit more than what would be half of normals. Sitka saw quite a bit less than half of their normals. So even though this September we've seen a lot warmer temperatures and lower precipitation amounts than usual, over the course of the year we have actually seen more precipitation than normal. So we'll take a look just focused in on Ketchikan. This is comparatively to the last 3 years here, from 2018, 2019, and now 2020. So what we're looking at here, those shaded green areas, are the measured precipitation amounts that we've seen in those 3 years. And then the brown line is what the normals would be. So in 2018, the area furthest on the left, we can see that brown line above the green, meaning that there was lower measured precipitation than what we would normally receive. And then in 2019, we saw that again, where the green was beneath the brown line, meaning that we had 2 years in a row there where we saw measured precipitation lower than normals, which is what led us into that drought in 2019. However, in 2020, we see that green line consistently above the brown line, meaning that this year we've seen quite a bit more precipitation than normal throughout the course of the year. Again, September was drier, but over 2020 as a whole, we've seen quite a bit more precipitation. And this is focused in on Ketchikan, but much of southeast Alaska has seen the same. Sitka is very similar to what we see here in Ketchikan. Take a look at our satellite imagery. We'll start off with what's going on today. Way out west, we have a frontal system moving into the Bering Sea, pushing its frontal system closer towards the Pribilof Islands and the eastern or central Aleutians. That's bringing a lot of rain to the area and some warmer air coming up with this. Now out over the state, we just have some lingering high clouds, quite a bit of lower clouds, especially as we get up along the Arctic coastline. You can notice that with some of the darker colors for those cloud tops, meaning that they are warmer and lower in the atmosphere. Then out over the northern part of the Gulf of Alaska, we can see a weaker low spinning in the North Gulf, bringing some rain to the area. So taking a look at our weather for the remainder of the day, we'll start with our frontal system out to the west, out over the Bering Sea, bringing some rain throughout the Pribilof Islands and the rest of the Bering up to just about the St. Lawrence Island area. We're going to see that rain extending through all of the Aleutian Islands, but not quite making it to the west coast, at least from the frontal system itself. We also have the low out over the northern portions of the Gulf of Alaska, bringing some rain to the Prince William Sound area and then extending east along the North Gulf Coast towards the Yakutat. Some lighter rain showers staying out over the central and northern portions of the Panhandle. Then as we push further into south central Alaska, we'll note that at the low-lying areas we are going to see some more rain, and then as we get into the mountains, we're expecting to see more of a mix of rain and snow, or in some locations all snow. That's going to be true as we push into the interior as well, where we have some rain at low-lying areas, but then as we get to higher elevations, we are going to see more snow. Then snow along the Arctic coastline, and a mix of snow and fog as we get closer towards AKwx under the effects of that high pressure up there. As we look into tonight, going to continue to see fog along the Arctic coastline, but the biggest change we're going to notice is that our frontal system pushing further into the eastern portion of the Bering Sea is going to bring that rain now to southwest Alaska, and then a mix of rain and snow as we get closer towards the Norton Sound and Seward Peninsula areas. Behind this system, we're going to see more rain showers throughout the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, and that rain's going to also extend through the Alaska Peninsula. Out over mainland Alaska, some lighter showers are going to remain, snow as we get up into the Brooks Range area, and then rain for much of the low-lying areas of the interior, some lighter rain throughout south central Alaska as well. Once again, it's snow at the higher elevations. Then out over the Panhandle area, a mixture of rain and fog will be expected in the central locations, and then maybe even some snow up by Haines and Skagway. As we look into Wednesday, going to clear up for much of the Panhandle area, just some lingering light rain showers up further to the north. Then as we look out over mainland Alaska, our front now pushing into the southwest coastline, allowing some of that warmer air to get pulled up all the way along the west coast, transitioning over what was snow and rain over the Seward Peninsula for tonight will now be all rain as we move into Wednesday, then rain all along the west coast, and some of that southerly push of rain going to start to come up into south central Alaska as well. With the southerly flow, we do expect the heaviest of that to be along the North Gulf Coast, with just some lighter showers making it through those coastal mountains. Up into the interior part of the state, going to continue to see rain at the low-lying areas, then more snow as we get closer towards the Brooks Range. Up along the Arctic coastline, primarily going to see fog up there, and then behind our frontal system, we are going to see some rain showers throughout the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands. For Thursday, the old frontal system will start to diminish, and a new low will have formed off the old boundary at this point on Thursday out by Kodiak Island, extending its front through the Gulf of Alaska, reinforcing the rain for the North Gulf Coast down into areas of the Panhandle as well, especially closest to the Gulf. Those coastal mountains in the higher elevations still going to see snow, but low-lying areas where most of our communities are going to be primarily rain. We'll also have some lingering rain over southwest Alaska and up the west coast towards the Seward Peninsula area, and then just some lighter snow showers for eastern portions of the Brooks Range, with some areas of fog along the Arctic coast. Out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, continuing to see that westerly flow with rain showers out for the Aleutians and for the Bering Sea. That does include the Pribilof Islands as well. As we look at our low temperatures, staying out over the Aleutian Islands, temperatures dropping down on Wednesday morning into the mid to upper 40s, then down into the 30s for the Bristol Bay area, 30s for much of southwest Alaska, with the exception of right along the southwest coastline where Makoriak and Kipnik both going to be right around 40 degrees for those lows. Seward Peninsula area, as well as much of the interior, going to drop down to right around freezing, with some locations getting just below freezing. Up along the Arctic coastline, all below freezing up there, dropping down into the 20s. Down in south central Alaska, should stay above freezing in the 30s for interior locations and near 40 along the North Gulf Coast. Down in the Panhandle area, in the lower to mid 40s is expected, with Yakutat getting down to 40 degrees. Highs for Wednesday afternoon, getting up into the lower to mid 50s for the Panhandle area, warmest further to the south. And for the south central area, mid to upper 40s, as well as some locations getting up to right around 50, with Homer and Kodiak getting to 52. In the interior, mid to upper 40s is expected. That's going to extend out west into the mid 40s for the Seward Peninsula area, right around 40 for the Kotzebue Sound area, and those mid to upper 40s extending down into southwest Alaska, 50s for much of the Aleutian Islands, and for the Alaska Peninsula. Then along the Arctic coastline, getting right around freezing for those highs Wednesday afternoon. For Thursday morning, jumping back down to the Aleutians, getting down into the lower to mid 40s, mid 40s to lower 40s for much of southwest as well, and then getting cooler as we move further to the east and into the interior, dropping down to just above freezing in the mid 30s for the interior, right around 40 degrees for much of south central Alaska, right around 40 degrees for much of the Seward Peninsula, and then along the Arctic coastline, dropping down into the mid to upper 20s. Down in the Panhandle area, expecting temperatures to get to right around 40 degrees, with the warmest temperatures in the more southern locations. Thursday afternoon highs, staying in the Panhandle area, getting into the lower to mid 50s. Lower to mid 50s for much of South Central as well. However, some places in the Copper River Basin going to stay a little bit cooler, 47 degrees for Glen Allen, and then also a little bit cooler for Valdez at 47 as well. In the interior, getting into the 40s to right around 50 degrees, and that's going to be true for all of southwest Alaska, mid 40s for the Seward Peninsula, 30s for the Arctic coastline, and the mid to upper 40s for the Aleutian Islands, Alaska Peninsula, and Pribilof Islands.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For aviation, we'll start off with a look at our flying weather on Wednesday morning. Out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, as we watch that frontal system move through, we do have some IFR conditions with the front pushing through the eastern portions of the Bering and Aleutian Islands, as well as some of southwestern Alaska. On the backside of that low, some of the northerly or northwesterly winds, we're going to have some MVFR and IFR conditions out over the central and western portions of the Bering, but some VFR expected for the central and western Aleutians. Out over mainland Alaska, primarily going to see MVFR conditions. However, in the interior, some areas of IFR are expected, as well as some areas of IFR along the western portions of the North Gulf Coast, specifically by the eastern Kenai Peninsula. Out over the Panhandle area, however, we are expecting VFR conditions to last through Wednesday morning. As we move into Wednesday afternoon, continuing to see VFR conditions for the Panhandle area. However, out over the Gulf of Alaska, MVFR and IFR conditions are expected, with more IFR conditions as we get further to the west, especially out over the Prince William Sound area and down through Kodiak Island. Much from the rest of South Central Alaska, MVFR conditions are expected at higher elevations, with some VFR conditions at low-lying areas. In the interior, northern locations going to see some MVFR and then VFR further to the south. Up along the Arctic coastline, expecting to see IFR conditions, and then our front pushing into the west coast, going to see IFR conditions from the Seward Peninsula down through the Bristol Bay area. Out of our northern portions of the Bering Sea, IFR conditions are expected, becoming VFR as we get to the Aleutian Islands. As we move into Thursday morning, going to continue to see VFR conditions for the Aleutian Islands, and then IFR conditions through much of the Bering Sea. As we get to the west coast of the state, expecting to see those IFR conditions extend over southwest Alaska and up north through the Seward Peninsula area. Mainland Alaska primarily going to see MVFR conditions. However, some of southwest interior are going to see some some VFR conditions, and then IFR along the Arctic coastline. IFR conditions also expected along the North Gulf Coast from the Kodiak Island area through the Yakutat area, but still going to see VFR conditions for the Panhandle. And Thursday afternoon, finally, MVFR conditions are going to spread out through the Panhandle area and continue to be around for much of the Gulf of Alaska area. And over the western portions of the Gulf, going to see some IFR conditions extending into the eastern portions of Kenai Peninsula. Then a mixture of MVFR and VFR for the south central area as well as the interior. And then up along the Arctic coastline, continuing to see IFR conditions. Down the west coast of the state, a mixture of VFR and MVFR conditions until we get down by Bristol Bay, where we will see IFR conditions. Out over the eastern and northern portions of the Bering, we're going to see IFR, and that's going to gradually become VFR as we get further out to the west. For the passes in Aktuvik, MVFR conditions are expected throughout the day on Wednesday, as well as at Adigan Pass. Lake Clark and Merrill should both be down in IFR all day on Wednesday. Rainy Pass will be VFR or MVFR on Wednesday. Windy Pass will also be marginal on Wednesday, and Isabel will start off IFR, improving to marginal conditions in the afternoon. For Mentasta Pass, starting off with marginal conditions, improving to VFR in the afternoon hours. Tanita, however, will stay down marginal throughout the day. Portage will start off marginal and then drop down all the way to IFR conditions in the afternoon. Chilkoot and White should both be VFR throughout the day Wednesday. For our freezing levels, our surface freezing line is pushing down into some areas of the interior and the mountain ranges around south central Alaska. We have a area of warmer air extending up into the eastern part of the Aleutian Islands and eastern part of the Bering Sea as well, and then some more warm air southeast of the Panhandle area, with freezing levels up to as high as 6,000 feet just to the south of the Panhandle. As you look at our icing, we have an area of icing out over the Bering Sea and Aleutians above 5,000 feet. Then some icing with our frontal system moving in above 3,000 feet by Kodiak Island, above 5,000 feet as we get closer towards the Norton Sound area, and then below 1,000 feet for an area of the stratus along the Arctic coastline. For our jet stream, strongest portion of the jet is by the eastern Aleutian Islands out of a westerly direction, 145 knots, dropping down as we get into the Bering Sea. Then an area of northwesterly wind, 65 to 80 knots out over central portions of the mainland, and 115 knots out of a southwesterly direction over the southern portions of the Panhandle. Down to 9,000 feet, our winds are going to be located around our low pressure system up to as high as 60 knots in the southern Bering out of a westerly direction. Then southwesterly winds 55 knots up much of the west coast, dropping down to 35 knots as we push into south central Alaska, staying out of that southwesterly direction. Pretty weak flow for the eastern portions of the mainland and down in the panhandle. Down to 3,000 feet, pretty similar light winds over the panhandle area and eastern portions of the mainland. However, southerly winds up to as high as 60 knots over the west coast of the state, 65 knots just to the south of the Alaska Peninsula out of a westerly direction, and then westerly winds 55 to 60 knots over the southern Bering and central Aleutian Islands. Finally, for our turbulence all along the Aleutian Islands below 3,000 feet out west, below 4,000 feet by the Alaska Peninsula, areas of turbulence out over much of the western mainland below 4,000 feet up north and below 5,000 feet by Bristol Bay.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder, joined again by Eric Stevens from the GINA, or Geographic Information Network of Alaska at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Thanks for joining us again, Eric.
Glad to be here.
Thanks. We are talking about satellites today, and what are satellites? And the easy way to talk about that would be to introduce our friend the globe here, which is a round spheroid type shape. We haven't been on a flat Earth as far as history is known for several hundred years now, and because of that we also know that we are orbiting around other objects in space, and that objects are orbiting around the Earth as well. We call all those things satellites in some form or fashion, right, Eric?
Right. Well, this leads to the discussion of Johannes Kepler's research 400 years ago. Did some of the early work and founded the 3 laws of planetary motion, which are important to planets and also to weather satellites.
Okay.
Kepler's first law talks about how the orbit of an object around another object is an ellipse, not necessarily a circle.
Kind of a flattened circle?
Yeah, depending on how flat
squished
it could be.
Okay.
For our purposes, we'll just say they're mostly circular.
Okay.
The second law is most important for us, though, and that is the closer an object is to the thing it's orbiting, the faster it goes. So in the solar system, the planet Mercury is the closest planet to the sun. It orbits the sun in 88 days. It moves at 100,000 kilometers an hour.
It is just
moving.
Okay.
Right. And further out from the Earth is Jupiter, and it moves at only 1/4 the speed of Mercury, and it has to go further, so it takes 12 of our years for Jupiter to make one lap. The further out you are, the slower you go.
Okay.
So we're talking about planets. What does it have to do with weather satellites? Turns out Kepler's laws apply to planets orbiting the sun. They also apply to satellites orbiting the Earth.
Okay.
You know, our natural satellite is the moon. There's the famous Apollo 8 Earthrise shot.
Beautiful shot.
Oh, yeah, you could just talk about that forever. December 1968, the moon is about 250,000 miles away from the Earth.
Okay.
Takes a month to go around the Earth. It's that far out, it takes a full month to do an orbit. Another shot here of the International Space Station. Instead of being 250,000 miles out, the ISS is only 250 miles up. It's really close. And so it doesn't take a full month for the space station to go around the Earth. It only takes 90 minutes. It's so close, it just whips right around 90 minutes.
Okay.
So weather satellites, there are a number of weather satellites, and there are a number of orbits. The further out you have the satellite, the longer it takes to go around the Earth. And this is important because different satellites have different purposes. So we have a satellite here. This little salt shaker lid will serve as our satellite going around the Earth. Let's say you have a satellite that's 22,000 miles above the Earth. This is kind of a magical spot because at that distance, it takes a full day for the satellite to go around the Earth. Imagine if you put your satellite 22,000 miles up from the equator and had it go with the Earth as the Earth spun.
The same speed.
Right.
Okay.
The satellite goes around the Earth just as fast as the Earth itself is turning. In effect, the satellite will hover in one spot.
I see.
And it appears when you make a movie loop of picture after picture after picture, you can replay that and you get these movie loops. Geostationary satellites, these are called. These are stationary in appearance. And they provide a constant frame of reference. We've got an example here. Another nice thing about these satellites, since they're that far out at 22,000 miles, you can see from pole to pole, which is nice. So they're pretty broad view and a constant frame of reference.
So those are the pictures. If you're watching a weather satellite loop on TV, your favorite weather show, that's the picture that you're going to see is one that's sitting over the same spot.
If you're seeing a movie loop play again and again, that came from geostationary satellites. That's the only way you can do that.
Yeah.
The bummer, though, for us in Alaska is we're up on the very top of the planet. And for geostationary satellites to work, they have to be over the equator. So for the geostationary bird to view Alaska, it's kind of like reading a book but you're reading it edge on like that.
Right.
So there's another kind of orbit called the polar orbit,
Okay.
which is nice. We're near the pole.
Yeah.
And here's a satellite. Those polar orbiters are much closer to the Earth, getting down toward International Space Station elevation. And they're not in the equatorial plane. Rather, their orbital plane is inclined like this. And the Earth turns under that satellite as the satellite orbits. The nice thing about that is for Alaska, the satellite will go right over Alaska a few times a day. And so you get a much closer image. We've got a shot from the Sumi NPP satellite. Specifically, it's a true color image from the VIRS sensor. That's an acronym there.
Okay.
But it's a beautiful shot of Alaska, and you can see so much detail. The kind of detail, because you're close in,
Very high resolution.
you couldn't get this kind of view from geostationary satellites. The advantage of these polar orbiters is nice close imagery. You can see a lot of detail. The disadvantage, though, is that the satellite flies by,
Right.
and then you have to wait a while to get the next image. And if geostationary weaknesses are that you're reading the page like that, the polar orbiter, you're reading the page straight on, but it's so close, and then it zips by, and you have to wait for the satellite to come around the Earth again. So there's no one perfect solution. Different satellites for different orbits. Each has their strength, and amazingly, it all comes back to Johannes Kepler and his laws of planetary motion. The same laws that govern how the planets orbit the sun, they govern how the satellites orbit the Earth, and even our little pretend salt shaker right here.
Right. Okay. Well, since the 1957 Sputnik, we've been putting man-made objects into orbit around the Earth and starting to get pictures back. Who knows what will happen in the next 50 to 100 years? Amazing
it's
stuff.
a growing science, and the future is bright.
Thank you so much for joining us again, Eric. And for more information on GINA and what the satellite systems do there and what Eric's been talking about today, you can go to the web address on your screen. For Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snyder. And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back for the marine section. We'll start off with a look at our ice edge. You can notice that north of Kaktovik we do have the main ice pack, and we are seeing some more growth and thickening with the main ice pack. However, there is some indication that we have some ice along the Arctic coastline, but that is probably diurnal in nature, where it is freezing overnight and then melting during the day. As we look down in the southeast for our marine forecast, northwesterly winds 5 to 10 knots in the inside waters. Then out over the Gulf waters, pretty light and variable in the eastern portions, around 10 knots, and becoming more southeasterly 10 knots as we get further to the north. Then on Thursday in the inside waters, southeasterly winds 5 to 10 knots. South to southeast winds out over the Gulf waters. In the east, 15 knots, getting up to as high as 25 knots in the northern locations. Out over south central Alaska, south to southeast winds in the Gulf waters, 10 to 20 knots. Highest as we get further to the west. 25 knots out of an easterly direction west of the Barren Islands. In Cook Inlet, south to southeast winds 10 to 20 knots, strongest to the south. And then in Prince William Sound, easterly winds 15 knots are expected. For Thursday, winds picking up around gale force winds at 35 knots by the Barren Islands, northeast to east winds there. Seas as high as 13 feet east of the Barren Islands. Then southeast winds 25 knots in the northern locations of the Gulf. 20 knots out of an easterly direction in Prince William Sound, and then in Cook Inlet, northeasterly winds at 25 knots expected. For Wednesday for the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island area, south to southeast winds for all locations. Northern locations as Bristol Bay and in Shelikof Strait around 30 knots. Get up to as high as 40 knots south of Sand Point, with seas up to as high as 16 feet, highest on the Pacific side and furthest to the west. On Thursday, westerly winds to southwest winds on the Pacific side, 20 to 25 knots. Shelikof Strait, southeasterly winds 30 knots. And then south to southwest winds on the Bering side, 15 to 30 knots, getting strongest as we get further to the west. Seas up to as high as 15 feet in western locations. Wednesday for the Aleutian Islands, west to southwest winds, 35 to 40 knots in most locations. A little bit weaker north of the eastern Aleutian Islands at 30 knots there. Seas up to as high as 21 feet, both south of or on the Pacific side of the Aleutian Islands, as well as by the western Aleutians. Then on Thursday, easterly winds throughout the area, 30 knots by the eastern Aleutian Islands, 35 to 40 knots for the rest of the locations. Seas up to as high as 21 feet on the Bering side of the central Aleutians. Along the west coast of the state, southerly winds in the more south locations, 30 to 40 knots, Strongest south of Nunavik Island, and then out of a southeasterly direction as we get north of Nunavik Island, 35 to 40 knots there. Seas up to as high as 18 feet, highest by St. Lawrence Island. Then on Thursday, we have flow along the west coast by Nunavik Island, southerly winds 20 to 25 knots, becoming more easterly as we go further to the north, around 25 knots. Out by St. Matthew Island, southeasterly winds 30 knots expected, and then by the Pribilof Islands, westerly winds 25 knots, with seas up to as high as 16 feet by the Pribilof Islands. Up along the Arctic coastline, easterly winds at 20 knots, becoming 20 to 30 knots down the west coast of the state, and then near the Bering Strait area, southeasterly winds 40 knots with seas up to as high as 18 feet. On Thursday along the Arctic coast, easterly winds 25 knots, continuing down the west coast up to 25 to 30 knots there. Recap for our weather for tonight. We have a frontal system pushing through the Bering Sea, bringing some stronger winds and a high wind warning to the St. Lawrence Island area. That's going to be in effect from midnight tonight until 6 p.m. on Wednesday, with gusts up to as high as 65 miles per hour. Otherwise, we'll have rain along the west coast of the state, starting to mix with snow in the YK Delta area, up through the Seward Peninsula area, and then rain throughout the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands. Some scattered showers throughout mainland Alaska, rain at lower elevations with snow at higher elevations, some fog along the Arctic coastline, and then light rain and fog for central portions of the Panhandle. As we move into Wednesday, some lighter showers in northern portions of the Panhandle lingering, rain through much of south central Alaska from that front pushing closer. That front is also going to bring rain throughout the west coast of the state from the Seward Peninsula area down through Bristol Bay, and some rain in the interior with some snow again at higher elevations. Fog lingering along the Arctic coastline throughout the day on Wednesday, and then rain showers behind our frontal system throughout the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands. Finally, as we move into Thursday, that front's starting to break down, but a new low is going to form off of the old boundary by Kodiak Island, continuing to bring rain throughout the North Gulf Coast with snow at higher elevations and rain for the northern locations and areas near the Gulf for the Panhandle. Rain throughout the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands is expected, along the west coast as well, up through the Seward Peninsula area, with just some lighter snow out over the eastern portions of the Brooks Range. And then along the Arctic coastline, we're going to see areas of fog and starting to mix with snow as we get closer towards Utqiagvik. For Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer. Thanks for being with us.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.